Senator North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. Hello, John.
Hello, sir.
It's your favourite subject again.
Yes, we're going to talk about the cash ban, and I'm getting completely frustrated with the quality of our political representation in Canberra. We just have people who are either too stupid to know what's going on, too lazy, or too corrupt to actually represent our interests. And so we're going to talk about a couple of things that I learned. So today's Sunday, on the previous Wednesday, I went to Canberra to spend the whole day lobbying about the cash transaction ban bill. I basically was there from about 8:45 in the morning, had about 14 meetings, and finished about 6:15 in the afternoon. I talked to everyone. I talked to many people in Labor, Coalition, Liberals, Nationals. I talked to One Nation, talked to the Greens. I talked to Jackie Lambie's office. I talked to Central Alliance. So I talked to everyone, and I made a number of points quite clear. And we'll talk about the points I made and some of the feedback that came through and what impact this show is having and our audience is having on this particular debate. But there was something that just was communicated to me. And generally, I don't like to disclose private conversation. Now, I'm not going to mention the politician's name, but there was something that just happened in one of these meetings that pissed me right off. And it just goes to why this nation, in many ways, I think this nation, Australia's gone backwards in so many areas. Politicians love to say we're the greatest country in the world. I think that's complete, the evidence doesn't support that we are the best in the world. There's some great things about this country, but in a lot of ways we are in decline. And when you're getting politicians saying stupid stuff, that's symptomatic of a whole broader array of issues. So what happened in this particular story that I'm going to go into is I had a meeting with a government MP. I won't say more than that, in the lower house, in the House of Representatives. So the cash ban bill has passed the lower house.
So he voted for it?
He voted for it.
Yep.
He absolutely voted for it. He has met constituents. So constituents in his electorate has approached him. He has had meetings. He has had conversations. From the things I've heard from some of these people who have met this individual, this MP said this was a reasonable law. He supports the government's efforts on the black economy. Nothing to see here, etc., etc. So, and one thing I should say is, in terms of this MP, he's a nice person. We have very civil, polite conversations. We've had many conversations in the past. But one of the things that we came up when I met this person on Wednesday, and we were talking about how the bill could be changed to make it more acceptable to Parliament, and we went through a whole host of different ideas. So we'll get into these sort of ideas around amendments soon. One of the things I said was, well, there's an idea floating around Parliament around removing the criminal sanctions around the bill, and so the reason why this is important, Martin, is in Europe. Where there is a cash payment limit or a cash transaction ban, if you break the law, there's a monetary fine. Australia is the only country in the world that has jail time on the table, and so that's why it's quite egregious. And this is why, for example, the Law Council of Australia is quite upset about the proposed jail time, and everyone's saying it's too heavy-handed, hard to get criminal prosecutions, etc. So when I mentioned this issue of, criminal sanctions may be removed, this MP expressed shock at me and said, what are you talking about? I said, the law says, this bill says that if you breach this law, you could go to jail for 2 years. And he had absolutely no idea.
And that legal clause about the jail, right? It's particularly insidious, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because essentially, in this particular bill, it's a binary. It's not like motivation of what people were trying to do. It is, if you did it, you can go to jail.
And when he sort of expressed shock, I said, "Why do you think people are upset with this? I mean, it's not just an issue of freedom and being able to transact the way you want. If you break the law, the federal court may send you to jail for up to 2 years for using legal tender, and people find this deeply offensive. Politicians in this country, and I know many politicians, they do not read the laws they pass. I mean, I spoke to another senator later that day after this particular meeting, and I said to the senator, to be honest, you guys don't deserve $200,000 a year when you don't read the laws you pass. And this particular senator, I know he works hard and he actually takes his job very seriously. He said there is so much activity in Parliament that he doesn't have the time to do all the things he needs to do as being a professional politician and read all the laws that we have. Now, I want to actually put a graph up on the screen just to give people a bit of a sense. So this is a graph from Parliament's own website that I actually found. And you go back from 1997 to 2018, and the federal parliament is passing anywhere between 100 to 200 bills per year. Now, some of these bills could be small. Some of these bills could be quite administrative. They're inconsequential. But some of these run into the hundreds of pages. And when you have 200 pieces of legislation passing in a particular year, there is no way that politicians can read the law, try to understand the policy issues, and then come to an informed view as to what are these laws for. So one of the things that people need to understand about Canberra is that in Canberra, people, when there's a lot of activity, people think that is good. People don't look at results. I would prefer Parliament to pass like 20 or 30 good laws and handle a couple of very sort of small select issues every year, rather than actually passing all of these new laws. And we've seen over the last, probably 4 or 5 decades. And when I worked in the Department of Finance looking at deregulation, we saw some graphs where you look at the number of federal laws that have been passed since the 1960s, it's exponential. So and to be honest, this was an issue that Julia Gillard raised to say over the life of her government. She said, we've passed in this term of Parliament, we have passed 300 new laws. And that was like a mark of achievement. We actually got stuff done. Well, what was the quality of those laws? Were those laws necessary? There was something fundamentally broken. So, one of the things I think is important to say to our audience is, if you've communicated with a politician either by phone or you've emailed them or you've actually met them in person, an MP or a senator, and you've talked to them about this, I can guarantee you 99% of parliamentarians have not read the law. They haven't read the explanatory memorandum. You and I have spent quite a bit of time, going through all of the policy documents, and I had to research quite a bit before I actually went to testify. So I actually have done the work. I didn't get paid to do any of it, and the people who are paid to make the law have absolutely no idea what they're passing. And so when you have, if you have received communication from an MP, or if an MP has said something to you about this particular issue, what has happened is, particularly on the government side, the Treasurer and the Assistant Treasurer's office have disseminated a range of talking points. And these are standard talking points of, what this bill is about, what the government is trying to achieve, etc. Who wrote those talking points? Most of those talking points came from the department. And we have shown that the department has been, they have lied to the government, and we exposed that in 2019. But also, when we look at the public hearings, there's not much policy thinking in detail and evidence that this stuff's going to work. And that's what, Senators Gallagher and Patrick were quite effective in December in exposing. And yet, a lot of these MPs are just taking these talking points. They just read the talking points. They think they know what they're talking about. They have no idea. And then they're going to talk to constituents saying, look, whatever you heard on the internet, don't worry about it. This is what's really going on. And these people have no idea. So there was a meeting a couple of weeks ago where Senator Jane Hume was at a Liberal function in Victoria, in Melbourne, and this issue was asked of her. And she said there is a tinfoil hat conspiracy where people are walking around the internet and putting different ideas out there. And when she said this, she pointed to her head as there is a tinfoil hat conspiracy. Do not believe these people. Well, who's she talking about? She's talking about us. She's talking about what Aaron Patrick saw, we are the conspiracy theorists, and yet all the things we have done, we have shown our sources. I took 200 pages of documentation to the committee and saying, these are the sources we rely on, this is the best evidence, whether it's the IMF or Professor Schneider, etc. The government has no evidence to show that this is going to work, it's going to actually have a net benefit, and so that's what we're fighting. We're fighting for our rights against politicians who are overpaid and not doing their job, and I'm completely angry about that, because if we're going to be a better country, we need better politicians who are actually going to do the work that they are paid to do.
Right, and the point I want to come to, John, is those talking points, right, the ones that came out of the department, probably quite low down in the department,
Yeah.
become effectively the life of the bill, and everybody just then parrots the same thing. We saw that in all of the written responses that people sent to us. It was just boilerplate. And
Yes.
nobody actually who were signing those letters off had any idea what they were saying.
Precisely. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, everyone got a whole bunch of standard responses from their politician, particularly if these responses came by email, and all of that was said that this bill is supposed to do blah blah blah. Well, why are these politicians using these standard responses? Because they're too lazy to actually do the work. And yet here we have politicians who have voted for the law that sends people to jail, and these people have no idea that they actually did that. And here's the thing. Again, if you're an engineer, a lawyer, look, a whole host of professional bodies and a whole bunch of professions across Australia, you are held to a high technical professional standard. Politics is one of those one professions in Australia where you get paid enormous sums of money. You don't have to have any qualifications. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to have any knowledge. As long as you are elected by your constituents, you get that position. And yet there is no, but the other thing is that, Martin, like a lot of these politicians, that they're not actually checked in terms of are they doing a good job? I mean, like, a lot of, particularly if you're on the back bench. Now, if you're a minister and you have to show up in front of the cameras, the media in some cases are very effective in exposing politicians who are not up to the job. But if you're on the back bench and you have a low or no media profile, you can basically sit on the back bench and do nothing for 3 years and get effectively $600,000, $200,000 per annum. You can vote for all these laws. You don't have to read anything, and no one's going to ever know whether you actually did a job or not. I mean that's how Parliament works, and that's why the Parliament, is completely broken. And we're seeing, So part of my role when I was there on Wednesday was to actually sit down with a range of advisors and politicians and actually go through, the government's claims, my counter arguments, and obviously to hear the questions that I was being asked, and then to provide the requisite evidence to say that here's where your understanding is correct, or where things are slightly where we need to go through that detail just so you have the correct understanding. But yeah, I mean, Australia needs to be better than what we're facing now. And the reality is, if this becomes law, it will become law because most politicians basically are doing what they're told by the Prime Minister down, and they didn't actually do their job.
Yeah. Remarkable.
Absolutely. Now, one of the other things that I just want to bring to people's attention is, we had an interview with Steve Holland in 2019 where we talked about what happened at this Victoria State Liberal Council meeting, where 95% of the in terms of the members that was there. So just so people understand, in Victoria there's about 10,000 members. They have branches all across the state. Those branches send delegates to the state council. So at the state council there could be 400 to 500 people there, and they vote and they debate about various motions. Steve Holland puts a motion up and says that the government should withdraw the bill. 95% of the division of the state council voted in favour. Now, when I met with a Liberal MP about the significance of this motion, so again, 95% sounds like a very big number of one of the most senior bodies within the Liberal Party of Victoria. This MP says we don't have to take any notice. The vote's irrelevant. Now, the argument is that politicians in the Liberal Party, elected officials, have to exercise independent judgment, and no matter what the membership says, we can sometimes listen to it. We don't have to listen to it, but there is absolutely no significance to the vote, non-binding. And he basically says, well, we're going to do what we're going to do, and we're just going to take no notice of the membership. Now, I used to be a member of the Liberal Party. I used to give money to the Liberal Party in terms of membership fees, etc. Now, look, since 2016, I quit. One of the reasons why I quit is that because the culture of the party is completely anti-democratic. I mean, it's anti-democratic here in New South Wales. And when it comes to Victoria, I mean, you've got politicians who are going to say, who have told me to my face, we don't care about the membership. They mean nothing. They can give money to the party, but I'm elected. I'm going to exercise whatever I want to do, and to hell with the membership. And it's like, well, why would you give money to a party that basically gives, that doesn't abide by its philosophical principles and doesn't do what the membership says? I mean, look, if you are a member of the Liberal Party today, I think it's completely lunacy that you're still in the party. particularly if your MP has voted for this and says, "I'm not going to listen to what you want me to do."
Basically, what you're saying, John, is that people's perception of democracy, in other words, you have a voice and you can have an influence, and that can sort of flow into the political process, in fact, isn't working, right? Because once you're voted in, that politician basically is under the thumb of the Prime Minister and taking the talking points from the departments like Treasury, and basically is disconnected them from whatever the constituencies are actually saying.
When it comes to the Liberal Party, I mean, look, some of the other parties work slightly differently, but when it comes to the Liberal Party, I mean, there is no mechanism. Again, this is the party of supposed to be, in terms of the free market, free enterprise, in terms of the individual, all of this stuff. There is no accountability to ensure that those politicians who are supposed to represent these sort of values, that they're actually going to act and vote in a way that is consistent with those values, and that shows that the Liberal Party as a political entity, it's completely broken, and this is why you see a whole host of people in the Liberal Party voting for a law that is completely the antithesis of what the party is supposed to stand for. And when you talk to politicians in their face and saying, well, 95% of your membership, the people who give you money, the people who volunteer for you and make sure that you win elections, they said, don't do this, 95%. And what's the response? Well, we don't care, we don't have to listen.
John, perhaps what we should now do then is to just checkpoint where we are in terms of the current progress on the cash ban bill.
One of the most important messages that I want to communicate to the audience on this point, Martin, is that our efforts, both with this show and then our efforts in terms of our audience, contacting their MPs, it is absolutely having an impact. So every MP, every office, every advisor I spoke to, they all knew about this bill because they're all getting communication from it. So, and to be honest, that doesn't generally happen. So sometimes when your minister or your shadow minister or your boss is interested in an issue, either the politician or the staff will be aware of the issue. Everyone in Parliament knows about this because everyone's getting phone calls. So the phone calls, the emails, the meetings that people are having with their MPs, there are some delegations happening. That is registering in terms of the politicians. So that's actually a tick. Now, importantly, so we had Malcolm Roberts come on the show around, I think, July last year or August, and said that One Nation is 100% against the legislation. This week, the Greens went public and said that they are 100% no in terms of voting. So we have them on the record. They are emailing their constituents and saying we will oppose when it comes up for a vote, if it comes up for a vote. And obviously, I spoke to some Greens advisors, and they basically confirmed that yes, what we're telling our constituents, the Australian people, in terms of our emails, it is absolutely our position. So that's good. Now, when it comes to, in terms of Central Alliance, now Senator Patrick is on the inquiry. So publicly, he said he wants to wait to the end of the inquiry. He doesn't want to necessarily prejudge, but he said on the public record that on the balance of probabilities, he's favouring no more than yes. Now, privately within Parliament, he and his office are telling people they are 100% no. So I'm putting them in the no camp. Now, in terms of Jackie Lambie, her office didn't actually tell me her position, but I've heard from various people from Tasmania who have spoken to her office, because people in Tasmania have called her office and said, what's Jackie Lambie going to do? Those people in Tasmania have been told she is 100% no. So I'm taking, assuming that her office told those constituents the truth and the correct position, I'm assuming that Jackie Lambie is a no. So what does that mean? It means that if Labor was to vote no, we have enough votes to kill the bill. Now, so the question then, so truly now, particularly because of the Greens and their position, it really does come down to Labor. Now, I had a range of meetings with people in Labor, and there's probably two important things to say about this. The first one is there have been in the last couple of months a couple of Labor officers who've said, don't blame us about this bill. We didn't come up with it. This legislation came from the government. So if it passes, blame the government. So I've told these people point blank, yes, the government came up with the legislation, but if you think you can just shift responsibility, if it becomes law and you vote for it and you try to blame the government for it and you play some sort of political game, this show and other editorial shows and columns across the country, we're not going to cop that. So I told them to the face, if you vote for it, you will accept equal responsibility for this, for the law passing, and we will hold Labor to account, the same we hold the government to account. So that's point number one. Now, point number two is, one of the main reasons why I wanted to go to Canberra was, what I wanted to figure out is what's the thinking about the current version of the bill, but also I wanted to know is whether they were going to cut a deal on a compromise on a watered down version. So on the current version of the bill, there are a number of officers that are like a number of politicians who are dead set against the current version. Now, Labor's position at the moment is they haven't come to a final position because they want to see what the inquiry report produces, and when that comes out on the 28th. So we have seen Senator Kitching, and we'll actually put a tweet up where she criticises the bill. So a member of the inquiry has already criticised the bill on the public record. So now I expect to see that criticism in the report, because if it's not, well then this particular politician has caved under pressure, or something has happened there.
So John, I'm really interested in this idea of compromise and making amendments, because often this is what happens within politics, isn't it? They sort of mess around a bit and try and find some sort of central ground and sort of therefore allow it to come through. I have an issue with that on this particular bill, but what's your perspective on the potential amendments?
So yeah, when I spoke to various officers, we went through a range of amendments where, so there are a few different ideas that are floating around about how the bill could be passed. Now, one thing I just want to say about the previous point I made is that, we have seen the opposition in terms of a number of people publicly, like Senator Kitching, about the current version of the bill. Now, there are people like, I'll name names because this has been told to me. So Senator Dodson, Senator Billick, so Dodson from Northern Territory, Billick is from Tasmania. They have said that their officers have said that their bosses won't vote for this bill if it comes up for a vote. So there's, it's not a unified position, but there are people who are very against the in terms of the legislation in its current form. So I think what we should see on the 28th of February is a lot of criticisms about the current version. So if we don't see that, something wrong has happened in Labor compared to what I'm hearing, what I've been hearing over the last few weeks. Now, in terms of amendments, there's four basic ideas, Martin, that were communicated to me. First one is in terms of the threshold. A potential amendment could be we raise the threshold, say from 10,000 and we go right up to about 50,000. So that's idea one. Idea two was removing the criminal sanctions, and if you breach the law, it's a monetary fine. So whether the fine's 25,200 or whether it's a lower amount, I mean that again could be up for debate. In terms of the third point, Martin, is that there was this idea about having more exemptions either in the bill or in terms of the rules. So there are certain industries that want carve-outs. Now, what we saw on the 12th of December was that the funeral industry, they want to carve out because of the particularly unique features of their industry. There was a whole host of people who said to me in Labor that once you start excluding whole industries from this bill, you weaken the whole foundation of it, and why would you even go ahead with it? And then in terms of the fourth potential amendment is to move the rules so that, remember, the bill itself, the bill before Parliament, makes every transaction in Australia illegal, and then the regulation says certain transactions are exempt from this wholesale ban. Now, the Scrutiny of Bills Committee has said that the way you draft this legislation generally is you put these exemptions in the bill so that if you want to change the exemptions, you have to come back to Parliament and it has to go through a whole parliamentary vote, scrutiny, etc. And so that's been one of the criticisms. So one version could be to take these exemptions and put them into the bill, so that you give the public more certainty about if the government, if they ever wanted to change the exemptions, you've got time to prepare. There is a debate, and it's not just the minister or the assistant treasurer just writing, signing a particular law or regulation. So they're the four basic ideas that sort of came up in some of the conversation. Now, the point I made that on each of these four potential amendments, even if you do one of them or all of them, none of them will actually improve the policy effectiveness of the bill. So I said, what's this all about? Supposedly, tax evasion and in terms of money laundering. None of these ideas could potentially, improve the government's ability to clamp down on tax evasion in terms of money laundering. So what I said to Labor is that if your position is that you are against this law in its current version, don't waste time about amendments. Don't waste time about watering down the bill, because you can't water down the bill in any way that's actually going to improve the policy effectiveness in terms of addressing the issues with the black economy.
That, John, there are other ways potentially to deal with money laundering and tax evasion without the need for this bill, right?
Yeah, so when I was talking to the MPs and the advisors about this, one thing as I said was, and I said in the testimony, but also more importantly, I mean, so the Greens have a formalised statement that they're sending to members of the public, and they're all actually offering different policy ideas around how do you address tax evasion, how do you address money laundering. So what did I say in the testimony? I said if you're going after tax evasion, you can go after the big end of town, because 1/3 of multinational companies don't pay any tax. If you want to go after money laundering, the OECD says go after the real estate sector, and you can expand the reporting framework with Austrac under the anti-money laundering law, or the reporting framework, and you don't actually have to go with you don't have to go with the bill that's currently before Parliament. So basically, I said is, there are different approaches to actually trying to address these problems. This law is not the right approach, and there's nothing you can do to change it that's actually going to improve the prospects of actually addressing those issues. So it's basically now or never. You either vote for it in its current version, or you basically say, no way, Jose, and we're never ever going to come back to a cash ban bill of any form or description.
Right, and that's partly because, of course, they're taking away a civil liberty that we have today to use cash the way we want to.
Yes.
And whatever you do to change the threshold and, the wording, that fundamental removal of a right is still there, isn't it?
Yes. Well, yes. So there's probably 2 points on that. Yeah, there is this removal of the right in terms of our rights to use cash and to be free. But the other big point is that on these big policy issues around the black economy, none of these amendments actually improve the government's ability to clamp down on those in terms of those issues. So again, for some Labor politicians, I think, don't want to look weak when it comes to the black economy. They don't want to be accused of being weak. Now, I think the Greens have been quite effective in saying we're not weak on the black economy. We just have a completely different approach, and the government hasn't provided the requisite evidence that this particular approach is going to actually fix it. So I would think that if Labor took the similar line and said, no, we're going to be tough on the black economy, we're going to go through a range of policy ideas to actually address it, but this law is not the wrong approach, I think that would be quite effective. So it does come down to Labor. Now, what I will say in terms of the coalition is that there are a number of voices, Nationals and Liberals, trying to get the government to withdraw the bill. So I understand that there are some senior ministers lobbying the Prime Minister to withdraw the bill. The Prime Minister, for whatever reason, is still saying, though, he wants this bill to go ahead. So there is a lot of conversations happening, and certain politicians told me to my face that they are working behind the scenes to withdraw it and not for it to come up to a vote. So I think on that issue, so there's a couple of things. I think I think one of the points I made to some of these Liberal and national politicians is you likely don't have the votes, so you don't want to be embarrassed if it comes over for a vote and you actually lose. So that's point one. Point two is that there is some speculation that some of the Nationals, one or many, may actually use this as an issue to cross the floor and embarrass, in terms of the Liberals. So if that was to happen, I mean, the Prime Minister would want to avoid that. They would want to avoid that as well.
So John, you just mentioned the possibility of some of the Nationals potentially voting against this or using this bill. There was an interesting piece on Insiders this morning. We'll just play that because it actually shows just that this is now beginning to get into the mainstream media.
Government's items on its agenda is a law that says you can't pay for anything with more than $10,000 in cash. I don't think, it hasn't made huge headlines, but it's causing a lot of angst among Liberals. It's a libertarian issue for some, that this is a restriction on your ability to pay with large amounts of money. And I think the government's sticking to its guns on that, but they're getting a lot of unrest from Liberals saying, drop that bill. And it's something where if somebody wants to cross the floor, that's an opportunity.
Who might you be thinking of? All right, thank you all. We're going to.
So can these voices inside the government actually prevail over the Prime Minister and actually have this withdrawn? Perhaps too early to tell. Maybe things will move in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Hard to know on that. But But one of the things I would say to people, because some people are still contacting lower house MPs because the House has voted. I mean, look, if you're going to actually invest time and energy and effort to actually let your voice know, my advice is spend a lot of time with your senators. Northern Territory ACT have 2 senators. If you're living in a state, you have 12. Focus on the 12 in your state, and obviously be as forceful as you can. And again, tell them to your face, you vote for this. I'm not going to vote for your party when it comes to time to the next election. So focus a lot on Labor. I would focus on Albanese's office, and say, if you want to be Prime Minister, this is a litmus test issue. You can't govern us and say that we're a great nation, we're free, if you're gonna vote and be part of this conspiracy to take our rights away. So I think focusing on Albanese's office is going to be quite important as well. One of the things I will say is that when I went to Parliament, so a couple of officers asked me for a bit of a summary. Why am I against this bill? So I wrote so there's a lot of material that we've gone through over the last 6 months. I wrote a 5.5-page summary. If anyone wants my summary and actually to use my summary in terms of communicating with politicians, or if you're speaking on the phone, or if you're meeting with politicians, email me. I'll send you my summary. Happy to share it around. And so I think I've gone through a reasonably comprehensive list of why this bill should not be law. And hopefully in the last 2 weeks we can change more people's minds in Parliament, and then we obviously just have to see what happens on the 28th of February.
Yeah, well, John, I think kudos to you for keep pushing on the pedal on the metal on this. It's really important, and there are some cracks, which is good, but we need to keep the pressure on, don't we?
Absolutely.
Martin North, John Adams, In Interest People. We'll see you next time.